Saints in Stepney Green, are all schools that were refurbished or rebuilt under BSF, all of them still suffering from RAC. They don't even know how to solve the problem when it's right in front of their nose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right friend has been absolutely right to act decisively to put the safety of children first. But as that list has grown today, what reassurances can my honourable friend give on the number of schools still awaiting expedited surveys and what the absolute cut-off is going to be by which all those surveys will be completed?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. Last time I was at this dispatch box, 95% of all questionnaires had been responded to. Now we have 98.6%, so actually the publicity has really helped to drive those people who had not responded, and we're grateful for them for doing that. I also committed that all of those that we had waiting to be surveyed would be surveyed by the end of this week. I can confirm that absolutely will be done. We have a good rate of surveys. We have 8 companies doing it, and we have now a process which will mean that as soon as they come in, we'll be getting to them to survey very quickly.
Jim Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to ask the Secretary of State a really straightforward question, and I hope that she can answer it clearly. Will the Secretary of State guarantee that all the costs for these repairs will be funded by new money from the government, not the current education budget that isn't enough anyway? Yeah.
Well, I think I've explained before, there are different parts to the funding. So initially, there is the mitigations, whether it's the surveying work or the mitigations work or the temporary accommodation. All of that will be funded by the DfE's capital budget. We have a budget for that work. There is also a revenue budget for additional things like transport, if you need to hire a village hall, etc. That will also come from a building a fund within the DfE. We have some spaces left. We've already announced some of the school rebuilding projects, but there are some still left to be announced. So some of that will be being utilised. And then beyond that, as the Chancellor says, we will do everything that is needed to keep children safe in our schools.
Mark Logan.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. I'd like to put on record my admiration for Mrs Sudworth, Tanya Levesky and Cannislade School for their monumental effort in ensuring the smooth running of the school since the RAC announcement. Can my right honourable friend outline how the department can encourage surveyors that have concerns about buildings containing asbestos, helping to avoid delays in the installation of temporary classrooms?
Well, first of all, I'd like to join my honourable friend in praising the team at Cannislade School, who have all pupils in face-to-face education, as the vast majority of RAC schools, of schools identified with RAC, the vast majority have all pupils in face-to-face learning, and that is down to the dedication of our schools' leaders. In terms of asbestos, all schools have an asbestos plan, but if there is asbestos which is needed to be moved as part of the mitigation works, then that will be safely removed as well.
Sarah Jones.
How many publicity videos for party political purposes did the Secretary of State make for Conservative MPs on the day she found out about the RAC issue?
I don't recall making any particular party political broadcasts. I did go and do, well, the day that we did the announcements, I did do the evening round and did the sort of pooled clip and recording. And then my honourable friend, the Minister for Schools, did the morning round. So that was the focus of our attention in terms of publicity.
Right, let us go Beauregard.
National Audit Office report on the 28th of June was, of course, an agreed report with the department, as all National Audit Office reports are. Given that that report identified that there were up to 700,000 children in schools where there were critical safety issues, what was the technical evidence that the Secretary of State said she required some 2 months later when that final school collapsed in the way that it did?
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. A very good question. So, first of all, in terms of the NAO report, that was regarding bids to the school rebuilding programme and the demand for the school rebuilding programme. In terms of the technical information, what we had done during this survey, if the honourable gentleman wants to listen, is a very important distinction. In the surveys that we started conducting from September 22, we sent our own surveyors into the schools. They were looking at RAC and they were surveying and saying whether it was critical or non-critical. That's why we had 52 that were already closed immediately because they were seen as critical. What changed was there were 3 incidences where the ceilings had been assessed as non-critical and they had failed. And I wanted structural engineers, because I'm not a structural engineer, to go in and to tell me, when something's been assessed as non-critical, has it failed for another reason? Can they say why it's failed? Or do I need to look at every non-critical roof and change my understanding of how we want to treat it, because I wanted to be cautious. So that's what we did. And as a result of that, we took all the non-critical ceilings and we decided to act on them straight away to keep people safe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Half hour ago or so, I came from a meeting with London fire chiefs who were calling for a national register of buildings containing RAC. It's a practical ask, really. Will the Minister work with other departments to ensure that that becomes a reality?
Well, I think the fire chiefs work usually with the local responsible bodies to find out how they minimise fire risks within a local area.
Marie Kelly Ford.
Speaker, and if I may, I'd like to put 4 questions to the Secretary of State, because the pupils and parents and staff at St Leonard's deserve some answers. Firstly, can we confirm the planned rebuild of St Leonard's will now be accelerated? Secondly, when will the venues for rehoming St Leonard's be confirmed and the finances approved? Thirdly, what additional financial and practical provisions will be made for the most vulnerable pupils, particularly those with SEND and those receiving free school meals? And fourthly, what options for special consideration will exam boards apply to Year 11 and Year 13 students this year?
I'm delighted that St Leonard's now has a mix of face-to-face and remote, and they've done a fantastic job to enable that, and I know they've been working with other local partners. In terms of the school rebuilding, we're making those decisions with the project directors. So with the project directors that we have on site in St Leonard's, we'll be looking to first of all, consider the short-term mitigations, medium-term, and when we should do the rebuilding as well. We have an MP surgery later on for any specific cases that anybody in the House who's interested in. I shall be there with my ministers and my officials. We're happy to go into the detail in any case and give you the latest, but it is still an evolving situation. But we will be there and will support St Leonard's as much as possible to make sure that children are safely educated in St Leonard's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure all those people she told to get off their backsides will be very sympathetic with the fact that she needed to go on holiday while this crisis was in progress. But can I ask her on the issue of revenue costs? She's itemised a number of things that the government will cover, but schools do face a vast range of potential costs under revenues, such as surveyors and other costs. Is she saying that all costs related to RAC will be covered?
Yes, all those costs that he mentions would be, the honourable gentleman mentions, they're reasonable costs. And also I'm sure he's delighted that all the pupils in St Thomas More are in face-to-face education. And in terms of working, I'm always happy to work no matter wherever I am, and always have been throughout my very long career.
Thank you very much. Justin Matters.
The Deputy Speaker, Ellesmere Port Catholic High School has got huge challenges here. 5 classrooms have been closed, the chapel, 2 corridors, changing facilities, kitchens and canteens, meaning a number of technical lessons can't be taught and no hot food can be served. Now, I've got a direct plea from the head teacher of the school. She says, I cannot understate the urgency of this situation, particularly with the temporary accommodation. We're having real issues getting the department to approve mitigations so that we can operate for all our students in the short term. So my plea to the Secretary of State is, will she, after this meeting, go and have a look and talk to her officials about getting the approvals that my head teacher needs?
Absolutely. I thank the honourable gentleman for raising this. I will take a note of Ellesmere Port School, and if he would like to join also the MP surgery later, we can go through in greater detail, or I can write to him on the matter if his diary does not allow that.
Andy Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could I press the Secretary of State on the source of funds needed to rebuild the RAC schools. I ask because repairs to RAC hospitals are coming from delaying indefinitely other hospital rebuilding schemes, including 2 in my constituency. Will any future schools capital projects be similarly rescheduled?
No.
Richard Ford. Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Colleton Grammar School in my corner of Devon is one of the 27 schools added today to the list of 147 schools already known to have RAC on site. The National Association of Head Teachers has pointed out that propping up ceilings with metal poles is clearly not a serious option. I want to see Colleton Grammar able to open up a small part of its estate that has had to close. But if there is new money, or if this is not going to impact the existing school rebuilding programme, what impact can we expect it to have on funding pledged last year to schools such as Tipton St John and Tiverton High School?
Well, can I assure the honourable gentleman that we're doing a very professional job. There is no intention of propping them up with metal poles. These will be largely be horizontal props involving tempered beams, which is how you actually build a building in the first place. The honourable gentleman, the honourable lady shows her absolute ignorance of this, either with steel structures or with wooden structures, which then would have another roof underneath. And when you look at these classrooms, and I would urge everybody to go and look at them, because you will see that there is no vertical propping in any of the schools that I've seen so far, and certainly that is not a long-term solution. So I think the honourable gentleman will be satisfied that there's very high-quality solutions for our children.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Deputy Speaker, while the dust has settled on media coverage at this time, I want to thank the Secretary of State for her clear commitment and positivity that she has shown today in finding a way forward. We understand that there can be some absent learning as experienced during COVID, and that's an example of how they dealt with that. But we also see detrimental effects on learning when it comes to the importance of engagement face-to-face. So can I ask the Minister what discussions that she has been able to have with the department in Northern Ireland Assembly, just to gauge the depth of the concrete problems that there are. I know I have a school in my constituent that has it, but I understand that school has been able to sort out those problems, and schooling and teaching has continued. But it's really important to know if there's any extra funding available, and if so, Mr Deputy Speaker, would that be subject to the Barnett consequentials so that we can also get some benefit? Thanks so much.
Well, I thank the honourable gentleman. And immediately once we had more information, we shared that with the devolved nations, because it was clear that we had been conducting surveys for over a year at that point, but that was not happening in the devolved nations, who I think are still in a position where they can't identify where the RAC is, so they can't go in and take the action that we took very, very decisively at the end of last month. But we will continue to work with them, continue to support them, continue to share evidence, including evidence on how to mitigate in a way that makes good solutions for our children. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Secretary of State for responding to questions on the urgent question there. We're moving on to the next one on the West Coast Main Line. Urgent question. We'll just allow the choreography. Right, you have to wait for the urgent question first. Gavin Newlands.
Well, hospital, thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for Transport for a statement on the contractual and operational situation of the West Coast Main Line franchise, and I congratulate the Minister on his promotion.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable General for his congratulations, and thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As you may be aware, the Minister of State, the Honourable Member for Bexhill and Battle, continues to represent His Majesty's Government today in Poland to support UK train companies at a major international trade fair, amongst others, and I'm therefore replying on his behalf. The Department has awarded a new national rail contract to First Trenitalia to continue to operate the West Coast Partnership, providing West Coast train services as Avanti West Coast. The national rail contract will have a core term of 3 years and a maximum possible term of 9 years. After 3 years, the Department can terminate the contract at any point with 3 months' notice. In October 2022 and March 2023, the Department approved the award of short-term contracts for First Trenitalia operating as Avanti West Coast to continue to operate services on the West Coast main line. Awarding short-term contracts allow the Department to monitor progress by Avanti West Coast in improving performance following the withdrawal of rest day working before considering whether it would be appropriate to award a long-term contract. Avanti's performance has improved during this time significantly, and taking into account other relevant considerations, the Secretary of State has decided to award a longer-term contract as announced in today's written ministerial statement. Over recent months, Avanti has made significant progress in recovering from the poor reliability and punctuality delivered in the latter half of last year. In line with its recovery plan and since the introduction of its recovery timetable in December 2022, performance has steadily improved, with cancellations attributed to Avanti West Coast falling from 13% in early January 2023 to as low as 1.1% in July 2023. Over 90% of trains now arrive within 15 minutes of their scheduled time, an improvement from 75% in December 2022.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. So another day, another blow for passengers who use the West Coast main line. Fresh from the negative cross-party reaction yesterday to use HS2 Phase 2 is on the chopping block, with the DFT on the last day before recess, shock horror, Mr Deputy Speaker, sneaking out an extraordinary award of up to 9 years for Avanti West Coast and up to 8 years for cross-country. Despite improvements in Avanti's service, they're still not running a full timetable, and the Minister simply cannot ask us and passengers up and down the West Coast main line to simply forget the last few years of horrendous performance. The Avanti service was on the brink, run into the ground by mismanagement and poor labour relations. In his letter to MPs, the Secretary of State says that Avanti is the most improved operator where performance is compared to the previous year. Well, that wouldn't be particularly hard, Mr Deputy Speaker. Talk about setting yourself a low bar. This award will be seen by most as rewarding failure. My criticism of Avanti is no way reflective of the staff who have been first class when I've used the service. I wasn't overwhelmed with confidence when it took me several attempts at last week's Select Committee to get Mr Mellors to tell me just how many jobs he proposed to cut by closing the Glasgow ticket office. So given the variable standards delivered by Avanti, I think we need full transparency. So can the Minister tell me what is the exact criteria Avanti will have to consistently meet if they will see get the end of the course contract, the extensions to be granted? What engagement the DFT has had with trade unions and the Scottish Government in making this decision? What alternatives did the Department consider? Was the operator of last resort considered? And does he not see that this award will be seen as Tory private-best dogma? We have piles of evidence through the operator of last resort and ScotRail that publicly owned and operated railway works. Moreover, with its stake in Avanti, Trenitalia will be able to reinvest in Italian rail infrastructure. And is it not time, finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, to follow Scotland's lead and put our railway back into the public sector where it belongs?
Well, I thank the honourable member very much for his flurry of questions. Let me just address what he said. Of course, he asked for the release of the, as it were, criteria on contract award. It's a commercial matter. We're not going to discuss that. But I can reassure him that the Minister of State has met very regularly with the entire industry and has been working on a weekly basis with officials and with Avanti, and therefore has had the matter very much in hand. In relation to the performance that he describes, I'm astounded that he's not actually agreeing with the Secretary of State and celebrating the improvement that's taken place over the last 9 months, and 6 months in particular. Cancellations now as low as 1.1% in July, 90% of trains arriving within 15 minutes, over 100 additional drivers trained and brought on since April 2022. Each of those are significant achievements, and it's all very well for him to talk about the level of his engagement, but it's quite noticeable as we look back through the letters that we've received, and the honourable gentleman has not exactly been shy in writing to the department. I have asked my officials to scan the letters we've received. I don't think we've received a single one from him in the last year mentioning the word Avanti. If that's some indication of how content he is with the service, then I am delighted to hear it.
Chair of the Select Committee, Ian Stewart.
Thank
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. As a regular user of Avanti services, I do agree that the performance has improved markedly, and I would like to pay tribute to the new Managing Director, Andy Mellors, and his team for turning around what was an abysmal service. I appreciate the Minister won't be able to talk in detail about the contract, but can he say a little bit to the extent to which this new contract moves away from the micromanaged national rail contracts which have been in place since COVID. They were right at the time, but they are now stifling innovation in the sector, and I hope this is the first of a revision of these national rail contracts.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his question, because he brings not just personal experience of the service as an MP for Milton Keynes, but also his very considerable expertise as chair of the Transport Select Committee. And he's right to pick on the point of micromanagement. And that is one reason why, having been in a period of relatively short contracts, a number of 2-3-month contracts, in order to monitor progress, the government has now seen fit to move to a much longer framework, a 3-year contract, but with a potential capacity to terminate thereafter if performance is not sustained. That strikes the right balance between giving the certainty that Avanti need to continue to invest in improving the service and the accountability that the government rightly demands. I would say that there is some awareness that in relation to services to Milton Keynes, West Midlands and to North Wales, that there is further progress to be made in that area, and I think I'm right in saying I think I'm right in saying that the new Chief Executive is very much focused on that issue as well.
Stephen Morgan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. For the second time in 2 days, the government has been dragged to the House to explain the state of our crumbling rail network. And for the second time in 2 days, the Rail Minister has failed to turn up. Surely things cannot get any worse for passengers in the north, we thought. But today the Minister has proved us all wrong by confirming passengers could have to suffer up to 9 more years of Avanti West Coast and up to 8 more years of cross-country. Mr Deputy Speaker, the Minister claims that there has been enough improvement to justify up to a decade more of utter chaos that is consuming our railways thanks to those 2 failing operators. Yet the latest statistics show that Avanti was the second worst operator in the country for punctuality last month, with only 46% of its trains running on time. And cross-country was the 4th worst, with only 49% of its trains on time. And the government's response to this? More lucrative contracts, and after millions of pounds paid out in performance bonuses, now these decisions have left glaring questions for the Minister to answer. What performance metrics were considered when it made these decisions? Have performance payments been restructured in the new contracts, or will he continue to reward failure? And did the government consider the operator of last resort, which has driven improvements on other lines? The country is tired of this cycle of failure, whether it is cancellations or delay, and any prospect of reform kicked into the long grass. It is clear this government is determined to run our rail network into the ground. It's their plan really to allow for rail services to have another decade of failure under the Tories, with hundreds of millions handed over to shareholders in performance bonuses and fees. If it is, it's clear that they are out of ideas and out of time. Mr Deputy Speaker, if they can't put passengers first, isn't it time for him to step aside and let us deliver the change our passengers so desperately need?
Well, I thank the honourable member for that brave shot. Let me just remind him that far from being dragged to the House, the government published a written ministerial statement and a press release this morning. Not only that, to the extent the government was dragged to the House, it was by the Scottish National Party for another. This is the second time in 2 days in which the Labour Party has been caught napping by another party in this House. Now, as to the availability of the Rail Minister, we try to play total football in the Department for Transport, Mr Deputy Speaker, and while Cruyff is herring down one wing, we expect Naskins to be playing through the centre, and that is how we think about these things. Of course, the Honourable is quite wrong to say there's anything of course he's right to highlight the previous underperformance, but he's entirely wrong to predict that that will continue because we see the evidence in front of us. We see that, as I've already said, cancellations have been as low as 1.1% in July, and over 90% of trains now arriving within 15 minutes of their scheduled time. That is the basis on, or part of the basis on which the Secretary of State has decided to award this new contract. Now, if the alternative that the Labour government is proposing is the nationalisation of our railways, then I look forward very much to seeing the budgetary implications of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, let alone any justification that civil servants directed by Labour ministers would do a better job than this new professional team at Avanti.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Whilst I appreciate the points that the Rail Replacement Minister makes about recent improvements in Avanti, can I ask my honourable friend if he accepts that the failures of Avanti in recent years have led to consumers voting with their feet and refusing to use Avanti services where they can, in the case of Birmingham to London, coming onto the Chiltern line instead, adding to the overcrowding on the Chiltern line. So what reassurance can he give that within this new contract there are incentives for Avanti to win that trust back so that we're not maintaining overcrowding on other railways such as Chiltern?
Honourable friend, of course, with Hugh's minutious attention to detail, he'll have recognised that yesterday we had the rail replacement bus minister, but today we have another rail replacement minister. And I think that's thoroughly in order. As regards the effect on customers, of course, again, he's spot on, and it is very noticeable how much the new team at Avanti recognised the commercial challenge of wooing back customers whom the disastrous underperformance of last year, which they recognise and they understand and they accept, have lost. And that's a vital commercial challenge. We judge that they are beginning to meet that and doing more than beginning to meet that as a matter of service. There is much further to go as regards the extension of the quality of the service. They recognise that, and that is all in the interest of customers and better customer experience.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It seems that this